Welcome everyone. In our last episode of this series, we talked about sustainable farming and the interaction with both biodiversity, climate change, water quality and regulation. And in a similar vein today, we're going to be talking to Fabiola Bordino about the circular economy, what it means for business design, and we're going to be drawing on the visionary business in development at Start Campus in Portugal. Fabiola is the Head of Sustainability, Marketing and Communications at Start Campus. She has a background in economics, sustainability and strategy with over 15 years experience with the likes of Santander, Deloitte, and joined Start Campus in 2021 to build a new generation of sustainable data centers. So please welcome Fabiola. And Fabiola, you've moved to Start Campus during COVID. So what motivated you to do that? And can you tell us a little bit more about Start Campus and the mission?
Yes, sure. Hi everyone. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited, first of all, to share a little bit about my passion around sustainability. Talk to you a little bit about circular economy and the strategies that we've been doing at Start Campus. And the third one is to how to bring community art. So going up to your question, can you hear me all right? I'm just making sure.
A little bit in and out, I'm afraid, there, Fabiola, if you could perhaps...
Okay, I'll move in a little bit. So what brought me and motivated me to join this super project is this project actually brings two things that I love together, which is sustainability and technology. So I've been working on this for all my life, but not in the data center world. And when Afonso, who is our CEO, came up to me and challenged me and told me, so Fabiola, I'm thinking about building this green giant sustainable data center ecosystem. He got me at Sustain. I told them, I don't know much about data centers, but tell me a little bit about it. And basically, we were at the heart of COVID. And the heart of COVID just confirmed two massive tendencies that we have that are ever growing, which is one of them is the digital transition, so the growing of data. And we can see that because one of them is us doing a Zoom, which is super normal nowadays. My kids went to online school. We're all addicted in some way to Netflix and the HBO. So everything, the entire world was running on online. We had to live from the house. So that it was a huge growth on data, and for that, the data centers. The other transition is the energy transition, and we need to move away from the fossil fuels into a more greener energy, right? And one of the things out of that transition is you get mission critical facilities like nuclear power plants or coal power stations. They are being decommissioned and some of them dismantled. And when we thought about this, we're like, okay, these infrastructure are actually mission critical and fairly good for data centers. And there's a huge need for data centers. So why build from scratch if you can repurpose something that is there, but is just going to be dismantled and to scratch, right? So we started looking at more than 100 locations in Europe. And the first focus was, let's look at what's being decommissioned and let's see if we can build a data center there. And we narrowed down to 50 to 12, and then we ended up with Sines in Portugal. Why? Because they have four things very important for a data center. One of them is an industrial area. So we're moving away from the regional metro areas where a typical data center is and is competing with places we have to live with power, with water consumption, and moving into industrial sites. Then we were next to an old coal power station. And this coal power station was the perfect place to build a data center. And it had a cooling system that it was very sustainable, which is the main pillar of Star Campus. It gets the ocean water, which is very cold in Portugal, to cool down the system. We thought, this is perfect. We can just repurpose the cooling system for ourselves. And then another other two things that are very important is space for renewable energy. Because we are in an industrial area, we have a lot of space to build our own renewable power. So we have solar and wind. And then obviously the last one, which is so very important, is connectivity. A data center could be as efficient as you want, as green as you want, but if it's not connected, there's no point. And Portugal, because its geographic location is the door to Europe, it has a bunch of subsea cables coming in and into Portugal, and then Portugal up to the rest of Europe via fiber optics. So that's how we decided, let's build the green giant, which is the Sines project. It's a 495 megawatt campus. And what is that? Well, I don't know if you people know what a 495 means, but just to put you a little bit of the context, in Portugal, the total, we have 18 megawatts. So when we say it's going to be 495, it's not to serve the Portuguese market, but it's to serve the world and from Portugal. So our typical data center or our client is a hyperscaler. A hyperscaler is the one that we use, for example, for this call, or it's probably the brand of your phone, or where your browser, or where you put your pictures on the cloud. So you kind of know your typical hyperscaler, or actually when you shop online. These big clients will need big data centers to process and to store data. And that was our core. That's how we brought up this first idea of building a green giant data center.
Thank you. We've brought up with the slide here, so it might just be worth at this stage. Just you touched on some of this, but the sea cooling part. I think you've talked a little bit. Thank you for that differentiation, if you like, between large-scale, hyperscale data centers, which is more for data storage, and then you've got the ones which are closer to the user, right, which is more about processing power, latency, connection to the internet. Do you want to pick up on a few other these aspects in the plan here for this facility, this enormous facility, actually? I mean, you've mentioned the renewable energy, the sea cooling, repurposing the sea cooling from what was an old power station, effectively. But that's not the only way in which you cool, is it? You've got multiple different options available here.
Yeah, so this slide kind of explains you a little bit of why we chose Sines. Sines has this perfect location that is next to the Atlantic Ocean. And I don't know if you guys know, but Atlantic Ocean is pretty cold. What we've done is we are located in an industrial area. And when we say that we are building an ecosystem, is because we are not just building the facility. We are looking at building the power and the cooling. The way a data center works is you have massive computers inside, right? They produce a lot of heat, and that needs to be automatically cooled. There's several ways of cooling, and a typical data center, what we use would be adiabatic air conditioning. So imagine the air conditioners that we have in our houses. Those air conditioners, they have power, so they consume power, and then they consume water which is potable. That was a no-go. If you want to do a sustainable data center, you need to have green energy and not consume water, especially if you're in the south of Europe, which water is scarce and it's an issue. So what we've decided, we haven't invented the wheel. We literally use the old coal power station process, which gets the water from the ocean and cools down the system by rejecting the water a little bit warmer. But then we thought, okay, we are in an industrial area. So let's look at what other industries next to us do and see if we can actually use some of their waste. And we're next to an LNG terminal. So Sines is a deep port area, and the boats come in with the gas in liquid, minus 180 degrees, more or less. And what the LNG terminal does is gets the water from the ocean to warm up the gas from liquid into gas, put it on the gas pipeline, and send it to the rest of the country. Then they would reject the water minus 10 degrees. What we thought is, let's get that water and create huge efficiencies for our data center and warm this water up to the ocean water temperature, creating for us, huge efficiency. And we thought, okay, if we're using the wastewater from WAND, which is actually gold for us, we're sure that our heated water, it's probably gold for other industries. And that's how projects like the fish farm, which is next to us, will be using our warmer water to create salmon and codfish, bacalhau, which is the biggest consumption is in Portugal. Then another thing is the desalination. So for the desalination, you actually need to have the water warmer. So it's a perfect actually cycle to get the water to warm up in our data center and then into the desal. Because we are also in an industrial area and hydrogen is booming, there's a bunch of hydrogen projects there are moving next to us. So they're like popping, I always say like little mushrooms next to us. So they can actually use the fresh water and the cooling water to their processes. We are then hopefully thinking that the water that goes out from the desalination will be industrial water. It will be used for crops and then for the usage of people.
Yeah. Thank you. I think the key message there, I think, is you're looking at your neighbors, your similar sort of assets nearby, and you're using the byproducts effectively, or the waste, as part of your feedstock, and then byproducts from your process are facilitating others. Which kind of brings us back to the very first question, which I wanted to ask, which was about what is a circular economy? Mm-hmm. And why is it different to this regular business? You know, most businesses would say they're being sustainable. What's the differences here?
So let me first go to the regular business. I always think of it, I'm a very visual person, so I was thinking it as a line, just a line. And this will be the life cycle of a typical product. Just think of it. And you have the available source, the resource, whatever that is. And then you have the production of that product, the supply chain, the manufacturing. And then it goes to here and the consumer buys it. It buys it, it uses, and typically at the end of the cycle, it just disposes of it and typically ends up in a landfill.
Yeah.
This is a typical regular business, right? If we're thinking about a circular economy, we think of a circle. And the beginning and the end touch, meaning that the cycle is the same, but when you get to the disposal of it, it's the recycling of it to become a new resource, to become a new product. So at the end of the day, it's the reuse and the regeneration of materials and products, especially as a mean of continuing production in a sustainable and environmental friendly way, right? And this can be done by reducing resources. So you preserve the land and the biodiversity, the renewable energy, for example, and especially the waste management, which is still fairly new industry and fairly new explored, but there's a huge model into it. And if we think about circular economies, the model is the key to building and developing in a sustainable way, leading to lower costs, ultimately.
Yeah. Fantastic. How did you build that principle into your design here? Because location's always been an important part of data centers in terms of getting the right skill sets. That fiber connection is so important. Electricity costs are massive because the operational costs are, as I said, cooling and processing power. But now you kind of blend this in with a kind of an extra, an enhanced locational requirement, which is how can I find the right thing where I can repurpose existing assets, infrastructure that helps you benefit from what was being built many decades before in some cases.
Well, that's why what we call the ecosystem. So a typical data center, and I'm going to risk and say typical business will look in silos. So I need to do this and I will do this. And what we looked at is, okay, let's take advantage of other people's waste or things that are not going to be used anymore, and let's make gold out of it. And that's why we call it ecosystem. And we looked and scouted for more than 100 locations. Location is the key. And there's 4 aspects to it. Obviously, the connectivity, as we said, and we are pushing a lot for new subsea cables to come in, which will improve our data centers and will prove the thesis of this new market in data centers. The power is another huge thing. So if we think about a data center, it's a huge power intensive industry. So a typical data center will just plug into the grid and consume whatever energy there is in the grid. If we're thinking that our type of clients and the world needs to evolve into a greener future, we need to be powered by 100% green energy. And 100% means 24/7. 24/7 is not easy. You cannot plug into the grid and ensure that you're going to have 24/7. The only way you can do this is by you building yourself the renewables. That's why we're doing, and half of our team comes from renewable energy. The other half comes from data centers. That's why we say it's not a data center company, it's an ecosystem company. Everything blends in to make sure that the renewable we do auto-consumes into the data center. But then we play around with, you have solar and you have wind. In Portugal, we are like Portugal and Spain, because they work as an island in terms of energy. We're lucky enough that they are invertedly correlated, meaning when you have sun, you don't have wind, and when you don't have sun, you have wind, which is the perfect match in Portugal. When for some reason and some events there's none, you have a lot of hydro. So you can make sure that you have a 24/7 renewable power straight into your facility. By producing your own energy for auto consumption means that you're not going through the grid, lowering the cost of power. And we are competing directly with the Nordics, because what they do, the Nordics, is they have really low power costs. And that is the competitive advantage of the data center world, right?
Yeah.
And then the cooling, the Nordics, we call it free cooling. And people tend to think that it's just opening a window and the systems cool down. It's more or less that. But in Portugal, what we have is our goal is the ocean water, which is a really stable, cold source. And by doing this and not consuming water and fetching the water from the LNG, we have huge efficiency. So we don't consume as much energy, meaning that our data center can be more efficient and less consuming of water. That's why the key is the location, obviously. Then another piece that everyone can do, and we are doing it because it's part of our strategy, is building the facility itself as green as possible. And that means building your carbon model from day one and ensuring that all the materials that you put in are greener or as green as possible, because materials are still materials and they still have some carbon embedded on it. But it's very important, if you have a strategy, you can build with less materials, less carbon emissions, and greener materials, always with renewable power. So that is our selling point, basically.
Fantastic. Talk to me a little bit about people. And I think when we were talking off before, and we were saying how the other key aspect of this is clearly, if you're building a brand new facility in an industrial area, you've got to have that connectivity to other businesses. And as I said, break away those silos. And the other aspect of data centers is one of the key aspects of location is skill set and IT capabilities. But you talked about community.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to know, how do you start engaging, and then how do you build that lasting community engagement? Because that is something, your plan here is to be here for a long time. It's a mega site, 30 times the amount of data processing storage facility in all of Portugal here. So how do you do that? How do you initiate it?
That's a great question. Actually, it has nothing to do with the industry. So if you are a new business, the first thing that you need to think is you are implementing your facility, your industry, whatever you're doing in the community. So you need to be involved within the community and not the other way around, just implementing your project and then saying, oh, by the way, I am here. The way that we develop this is before we even start construction, so before we even put the first shovel on the ground, we went to the community. And in Sines, we talked to more than 23 associations, political parties, the municipality, NGOs, education facilities, very important. And first of all, we educate them and told them, okay, what a data center is. Because I know what a data center is now, but before I was like, yeah, I'm sure that's like where my pictures are and where stuff is processed. I didn't know it was needed for Google Maps all the time, for trading, for everything that we do with our lives now. Everything that we have on a phone, that's data. That's the data center. So we went and explained to them, what is this that we're building? Why we're building in Sines? Why is it important for us to be part of the Sines community and industry, bringing the circular economy and pushing not only the local supply chain to build greener, to do everything locally, but also the industrial area not to work in silence. Because we have petrochemicals next to us, we have the gas, we have hydrogen, and we can consume hydrogen as well. So another thing that is very important is people don't know this, but data centers, they have a lot of people working on it. So we're going to have 6 buildings, and at the end of our campus, 495, we will be having 1,200 direct jobs and up to 8,000 indirect jobs. This impacts massively the community, right? And because we still have time until the end of the construction, we have time to work directly with the education facilities to be able to produce new engineers and new technicians, very much focused into the data center world. Another thing is, because we're next to Old Cold Power Station, there's mechanical engineers, there's communication engineers. They've been working there all their lives. They're perfect for us. They just need to be reskilled into the data center mind, into the renewables, into the cooling, and then they can come and work for us. So we've been working with these communities and the schools and the universities to make sure that all of this is ready and we have the skills needed for when the data center is up and running. Another thing is, typically businesses will come up to the communities and just give them something to the municipality or whatever that is. We ask them, each one of them, how can we, Star Campus, help you? It was 23 associations. Everyone has their own agenda. So I'm not going to say it's easy to please everyone, because it's not. So what we came up by doing a lot of benchmarking and see what was the best practices is the Gamma Community Platform. And what is this? It's a platform where we empower local people to do their projects. So anyone can submit a project that it is for the community. So for Sines and Santiago, which is the areas where we operate. And those projects need to be on our 4 main pillars: education, community, entrepreneurship, and environment, obviously. We did the first session, the Gamma, this year. We had 20 projects. After that, we had a day with the community, kind of a little bit like Shark Tank kind of day, where the people went and presented their projects, and it was very interesting. We ended up sponsoring 3 projects that are up and running, all in education and healthy and environment. At the end of the day, what we said is, we can provide you the platform, but who chooses what project goes ahead is the community. So there's a voting for the community. And that's what we thought it was the best thing to give to them. And we are not operational just yet. And it's important to give back to the community before you even operational. So we are here to stay, guys. We're going to be together and on the long run. Let's do this together.
Fantastic. And did that community actually help with, did your strategy change, evolve? Did the plans change and evolve as a result of that engagement with, when I look at some of the things that you guys have put out there, like 65, 72% of the materials, everything comes from local resources. So your supply chain and construction is kind of coming locally. Is that something which is, and you've got some very ambitious biodiversity regeneration programs as well going in place, which goes well above and beyond what you'd normally expect from a data center, right? So is that because of that community engagement? It was like, hey, if you're going to be here, then this is how you become a good neighbor. And hopefully that.
It was a bit of both. I'm passionate about sustainability and biodiversity because we tend to forget about biodiversity. And the truth is, we're next to a protected area. So a huge protected area, which is the rest of the coast of Portugal. And for us, it was very important to make sure that the landscape is not beautiful grass that consumes a lot of water, but it's actually integrated with what is local and the local species. And one of the projects that we've done is carbon sinks together with the local universities. So what we told them is, we're going to be carbon intensive because of the construction. Unfortunately, construction is still construction and it has a lot of carbon embedded. We want to be able to offset our carbon, not in a way that we offset carbons in another country or in another region. We want to offset our carbon here. How can we do that? So working together with the universities and the local schools, we came up with our what we call the carbon sink. And it's building or planting trees and bushes that sequester, so they absorb carbon. And they've studied, I'm not going to say I have, because they are experts. The biggest plants, they absorb more carbon in order to mitigate the carbon emissions we have on the building. And we have that on the landscape of the project. We have that on the municipality. The municipality has a lot of green corridors to ensure that the communities are happy and they don't see, for example, the solar plants, or they don't see the petrochemical industry because it's an industrial area. And another of the project is beneath our solar panels. So we can actually have 2 purposes of the land. We can do renewable energy and we do carbon sinks at the same time. Yeah. So, and this comes a lot from communication. I find that everything in life, and not only in business, is all about communication. If we talk to people, and people, businesses, local business and communities will come up with better solutions, sometimes super easy solutions that we just don't see it because it's outside of our comfort zone. And together, everything is easier, I believe.
Fantastic. And can we ask the question? You mentioned it earlier about green giants. So I'm guessing that, there was a kind of question mark as to, you painted a picture of how you can create this green giant in industrial areas. But this is the first project and it's underway, but what's the alternative? How do you do this in a different area, a non-industrial area? And so I think in our conversation earlier, we were talking about urban edge and a different model. So I was thinking in terms of how do you create a sort of repeatable offering around circular economy? It's not it's not the same blueprint as what we have here. So what is the urban edge?
Yeah. Let's talk about urban and core. Core is what is the green giant, right? And the edge is the data center that is next to what I call the eyeball. So it will always be in the metro area. And that is where the data is going to be processed. For example, for trading, it needs to be next to the financial area. When we are on Netflix and you have the top 10 of your country, for example, that is downloaded in the data center that is next to you because that's what people use the most. Or when the kids, and I'm going to apologize right now because I don't know, the shooting game, you need latency. Everything that is latency based will be downloaded and will be processed within your local data center. But those are small data centers. 4, 5 in big areas, you would have 10, but no more than that. Everything else that is big and it's not latency specific should go into an industrial area where you can actually drink from the circular economy of other industry nearby. And so you need good balance of both of them. Nowadays, or until a couple of years ago, all you had was metro area. And there would be edge and core all mixed up. And now, finally, we are moving, and the entire industry is moving into okay, we need to segregate and have the latency next to the eyeballs, but the core can actually be in another industrial area. For example, a lot of the hyperscalers will have their core data centers in middle of nowhere, quite literally, in Sweden or Finland. So when you grab your phone, and I'm in Portugal, you're in the UK, right? And we go into our phone and we go to Google, and Google, give me tips for S. And you know, when he pre-populates and says Sydney, or whatever that is, that's actually being calculated and processed probably in one of the Nordics. And for me and for you. So what we're trying to do is, because we need redundancy, is bringing those big facilities into the South of Europe. So we can process North America, South America, and Africa as well from here. And so you always need a good balance of the edge and the core. You can't, or you shouldn't live just with one, just with the other, because they have different purposes.
And then, so it begs the question then, so the principles which you've used to design the large facility, can that be replicated at a smaller scale with the edge kind of building of facilities? In principle, maybe not to the same extent because you're in an urban environment, right?
Yes. The only small thing is that when you want to build your own renewables, they're typically not in the metro area. So you can go to the grid, but you need to ensure that you have green power all the time.
Got it. And let me ask you a question about the commercial perspective here. Is the approach, does it work out to be as competitive as traditional data centers?
That's a very good question. I think, honestly, it is the only way to go, because clients actually, they all have a really high bar of being carbon neutral by 2030. And the only way a big hyperscaler is carbon neutral is if their data center is carbon neutral. So ultimately, yes, they are as competitive or more competitive because, one, they will help the client go into their goal of carbon neutrality. Two, the price of power is cheaper if you do it by yourself, meaning it's out of consumption. You don't have to go to the grid and pay the grid charges. So yes, ultimately it is more competitive, but you have to build larger scales to make it more competitive.
So it's a kind of trade-off, isn't it? So you're saying that you can benefit from wholesale electricity costs rather than retail prices. You don't have the price volatility that we've had this last 12 months.
Exactly.
Risk has gone away. The capex cost is a little bit more upfront. Let's switch to the environmental benefits, because this is where the kind of real nub of this comes in, right? So is it fair to say that most data center operators these days, they tend to migrate towards renewable energy, right? But so what's the real benefit here? If I think when we procure data services, cloud computing services, we'll ask for, is it low carbon? And we'll get here's your scope 3 emissions. They're pretty low, to be fair. So what's the real advantage here? What's the environmental credentials? How do they stack up differently?
So I would say that most of data centers will move into renewables. Unfortunately, there's not enough renewables on the grid to be able to be 100% renewable. So our biggest competitor and our biggest benefit is we are 24/7 renewable. And then you have another benefit that is we still, unfortunately, but we'll get to that, sustainability reporting is still very, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but it's not standardized. So every company can ultimately report what they believe is the best. And a lot of people still don't know what they have to be reporting. So scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And the truth is, if we set the bar really high, we know that other industries will follow, because it's peer pressure. It's peer pressure for the suppliers as well. And this will push the supply chain into building and providing equipment that are greener. And for that will bring a huge benefit, not only for us, but for the entire industry. And ultimately that will bring a huge benefit to the planet. So again, not just looking at us and our belly button and our silo, but actually looking at the bigger picture is we need to be pushing, and there's always a first mover, right? And we know it's harder. It's like being the first child. You need to open barriers, but we know that other people will follow. And the truth is, our clients are very happy with the approach that we're taking, and they're always challenging us, and we challenge back the supply chain. So it's kind of like a circle economy per se. The sustainability is moving by itself, and it's huge in terms of benefits to not only the environment but the community, and I would say.
So I think you had a target of being, and I'll ask you the difference here, net zero by operations by 2025 and 100% carbon neutral by 2028. So you're going to have to help. What's the difference?
So we're going to be constructing or in construction up to 2028. And as I said before, I'm not going to say impossible, because nothing is impossible. It's very hard to build and be carbon neutral at the same time. So when we say that we will be carbon neutral in operations, the entire operations of our data center will be carbon neutral by 2025. So the green power and the operations by itself will be carbon neutral. But we can be only 100% neutral once we stop the construction itself and our carbon sinks that are up and running. When we build the carbon sinks, we are actually planting small trees, and those need to grow to get more carbon in order to offset the carbon embedded in the building. That's why we can only be carbon neutral in 2028.
So let me ask Amarjeet if you can bring up, there's one more slide here on the circular economy. And I think this is kind of piecing together now for me. So use local resources that reduces the carbon emissions and other impacts of waste, repurpose what you can. I'll let you walk us through this slide, but this is a terrific example of building in circular economy into a Vista design.
Yeah, so basically this is what we say, it's cradle to cradle, right? So we need to think about the natural resources, the material that we're going to be consuming. that for construction or for power. And we need to make sure that the design of the building is as green as possible in order to get this natural ecosystem have a lower carbon emission. Then when we think about, okay, what can we do that is a little bit further, is repurposing existing facilities. By repurposing, you're not, one, building more infrastructure that has carbon embedded in it, and you're actually absorbing, per se, the carbon embedded in an existing facility that, for example, the one that we're using, it's more than 40 years old. Then what we do is we offset via the carbon sink, and that is huge. And one of the things that I think I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again, it is very important for us to offset regionally. So if we are emitting the carbon and our building has carbon emissions, then we need to offset it in the region, in the place. That will promote then the regional development and the social health, which is very important when we talk with the communities to make sure that the communities are involved. There are people in the community working with them. And then we'll go and then we do the cradle at the end of the day, the cradle to cradle approach is the complete environmental assessment of the full footprint of products, material extraction, the production, manufacturing, the transportation, the product use, the IT equipment, the life, the end of life, and then the reduce, the recycle, and the repurpose of the waste, right? And we want to ensure that when we reduce, recycle, and repurpose, we go back to number one, and it goes to the circular economy, and we can actually have a positive handprint. So the footprint, a carbon footprint, is linked to negativity, so carbon emissions. A handprint is positive, and that's what we want for the community and for the industry. We want to have a positive handprint and be different in the way that we push the industry, so everyone actually provides positive to the community, to the environment, and to the industry.
I'm going to move us into a question around customers. Are they drawn to this approach? I know that you're still constructing the first phase of this project, but is customer uptake better than what was expected or as expected?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest drawn of the clients. Obviously, I'm not going to lie, it's economically, because at the end, it all goes down to the economics of it. The fact that it's competitive, it's very important that it's competitive with the sustainability. One of the things that clients have been telling us is actually you're walking the talk. And it is true that there's a lot of talk about sustainability, but it's still very new, and we are still testing the reporting, how to do this, how to do that. And it doesn't mean that we're doing it in the right way. We're doing the best we can with the tools we have now, but we're doing it, and that's what differentiates us, and that's what the clients like, because we are actually delivering what they need for their own sustainability goals, which are in 2030. It's around the corner.
That's true, and I guess as their goals change as well, they'll move from being focused just on carbon to, as TNFD is fast approaching in September, they will start to ask questions about biodiversity, water consumption, waste, and that's what your model is, integrated all those into both design and operation. What about how are you funded? How do you make this happen? What are your investors saying about the strategy as well?
So we are funded. We have two investment management funds. One of them is Gibson Kempner, US-based, and another one is Pioneer Point Partners, UK-based, and they're both greenfield funds. They have a track record of investing in sustainable energy, water, and data center infrastructure. So when we came up to them with the idea, okay, let's do this. At the time, we didn't call it Green Giant, but just this data center ecosystem where we have the tower, we have the data, we have the connectivity, and we bring all of this together as a holistic idea. They were thrilled. It is a huge investment. We're talking about 3.5 billion euros, over 9,000 jobs, and it is just for the infrastructure. We're not even talking about IT investments or IT equipment. It is big, but it's the future. And what we're building is we're not building for a 5-year strategy. We're actually building for future proof. We're building for 20 years. So this infrastructure is thought of to be up and running in for 30, 35, 40 years and as green as possible. Obviously, with new materials, we know that building one will be the less green one. As we move on, we have lessons learned, there's new materials on the market, and we are able to improve on the carbon embedded. And actually, just the entire construction and the IT equipment, it's ever evolving. So it's not something that is just standard.
Yeah. And so let's ask what comes after this project. So this is the first project, operational in 2024. So over the next 5 years.
Yeah, we're doing the first building, 6 buildings out of the campus. First building will be up and running 15 megawatts in the next few months. And then we are building 5 other buildings phased out from 90 to 120 megawatts, depending on the client's needs. It will be finished by 2028. What's next for Star Campus? Well, building the same thing in other locations. You never get exactly the same conditions, but the baseline is to have the power, the facility, and the connectivity. So we are already working on a couple of other projects in other locations where we can replicate more or less the same project. And that's the future, is having bits of green giants everywhere.
Fantastic. I'm mindful of time. We're going to ask a few questions, but if I kind of summarize, I guess, my takeaways here from our discussion, I think what we say is designing for a circular economy should be commercially beneficial, as well as it's aligning to the direction of travel for climate change, biodiversity, water conservation, and waste management. Strategy involves designing in right at the very, very start of the process and taking a long-term view. And at the heart of that is communities at the central pillar, combining the obvious things that we need anyway, job creation, the skill sets and capabilities, but the desire to integrate that sort of local resources, local thinking into the long-term planning. And circular economy doesn't work in silos. So business works with other actors, the supply chain, your neighboring business partners, which are either going to supply you with something or going to take your byproducts away. So, but I think what you've also alluded to here is there's no simple blueprint. You've got to identify what's important in each area, each sector. For data centers, that was very much about the search criteria for locational opportunities, but it was enhanced with where can I get cheaper cooling, free cooling, more sustainable cooling, and then integrating that in with the whole, as you said, cradle to cradle approach. So thank you. We're going to take a couple of questions. We did have a couple before we began. So let's just bring them up by the first question we had in here was, could you provide some practical examples of businesses successfully adopting a circular economy model? What are the key factors that contributed to their success? I'm guessing apart from data centers here.
Well, if you think about renewables, the water system, there's a bunch of, I'm going to just talk a little bit about data centers because there's one in Paris that I really think it's cool. So Paris has heating problems, but it's not like the Nordics, so they don't need to heat up a lot. What they're doing with the excess heat of the data center is they're warming up the pools. So basically, all the public pools are nice and warm now, even during the winter, because you have the heat of it. So if circular economy is in everything we do, it's not only our business, it's a mindset. And we need to start thinking about what can be used. For me, it could be waste, but for you, for example, it could be gold. And that's with everything, with clothing, with cars, with food even. And just a little bit of outside of our box of everything that we've been taught of, and start thinking, how can we be better? And another thing that is key is communication. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your neighbors as people, as houses, or as businesses, and you will see that there's a bunch of synergies. If people talked, that's the start of circular economy.
Thank you. We'll take one or two more. How can you measure the impact of transitioning to a circular economy, both in terms of environmental benefits and economic value?
Well, if you think about what we're doing in Star Campus, us, by using the colder water from the LNG, we increase dramatically the efficiency of our cooling. By increasing dramatically the efficiency of the cooling, we use less power. Using less power, it's less cost. So actually we get more profit. That's one, and it's fairly simple, right? Another, how can we do this? How is it better for the environment? If you're producing less energy, it's always better. But sometimes it might not be better for the environment for your own company, but it might be good for the company that you're taking the waste from, or you're giving your waste to. And at the end of the day, everyone and all of this sustainability is for one purpose, and it's for the planet, and to ensure that our kids have a better planet than we do, and we can leave actually good, sustainable ways for them to grow. So the environment, it's always about the carbon footprint, the amount of resources that we use, and look at it as the entire cycle, not only as us or your own business, I would say.
Perfect. Last one, what's the biggest barriers and challenges that we face when trying to adopt this model, and how can they be overcome?
That's first of all, understanding how you can do circular economy, where you can get synergies. I would say that the biggest barrier is to get other companies on board. So it's all about communication. And at the end of the day, a lot of the companies will be, what's in it for me? It's what it is. And you need to bring a good business case, and it could be good for me, it could be good for you, and let me explain you why. And it could be good for the planet, the industry. So it is very, people are used to, and people are little habits, monsters, let's say. We all like our habits. And it's the same thing with businesses. I've done this all my life. Why am I changing? And challenging the status quo is the most challenging bit. So you need to be persistent and sometimes knock on a few doors. Circular economy, it will be on the mindset of our children for sure, but it doesn't mean that it's in this generation. We need to open up the barriers. What I would say is never give up. It wasn't easy for us to get the water from the LNG or to get the infrastructure from the repurposed coal power station. We had huge barriers, but we persisted because it's good for the environment, it's good for the project, let's do this. And ultimately now we actually have a bunch of products that want to use our waste. So it's pushing the boundaries and pushing the mindset.
Breaking those silos.
Exactly.
Thank you, Fabiola. We're at the top of the hour, so I just want to say thank you for everybody for joining us today. We're going to take a little bit of a break over the summer, and we'll see you back here in September. Thank you again to Fabiola for being a wonderful guest today, and we'll see you again in September. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was lovely.
Take care. Thanks, guys.
You too.